And welcome to the latest lecture in the current session of technical meetings presented by the North East Coast Joint Branch of IMarEST and RINA in association with the Nautical Institute. Normally, of course, we would host these meetings either at Newcastle University, South Tyneside College or Trinity House, but clearly we can't at the moment. However, when circumstances allow, we will revert to live meetings. Details of the programmes can be found in the various institutions' websites. This evening's speaker, excuse me, is Mr. Iain Mackinnon of the Maritime Skills Alliance, who will be discussing the recognition of qualifications in the maritime sector post-Brexit. Mr. Mackinnon is the Secretary to the Maritime Skills Alliance, a UK-wide body that works primarily to create and promote flexible qualifications and apprenticeships. He spent almost his entire working life in the skills field, joining the civil service after graduating, and has worked in both field management and national policy roles. He's run a government training agency and a training charity, and since 1999 has run his own consultancy. In 2013, he joined the Maritime Skills Alliance, and last year was also appointed as a commissioner with the new Maritime Skills Commission. From 2005 to 2010, he chaired the board of the large College of Further Education in London. In 2010 to 2017, he was a non-executive director with Pearson Education, who run EdXL exam board. You can submit questions to Mr. Mackinnon at the end of the presentation or during the presentation using the Slido platform. Use the access code MARITIME. At the end of the presentation, Mr. Mackinnon will respond after his presentation, of course, is complete. And without any further delay, I shall hand you over to Mr. Mackinnon to give his presentation.
Thanks very much, Dennis. I'm hoping that people can see that. Can you see that all right?
Yep, we can see it. Just needs to go into presentation mode.
Brilliant. Yeah, good. Right, thank you very much. I'm going to start trying to claim some Geordie credentials, if I may. I'm very conscious that I'm talking to the North East branch and I've got a Southern English accent, but I did go to school in Newcastle. All my schooling, 9 years at school there. My nana, my mother's stepmother, who I was very close to, was a Geordie, grew up in Percy-May, North Shields. Her nephew studied at South Shields, and once he got his ticket, worked his way up to master in the coastal trades in Australia. And my wife's nephew is currently studying marine engineering in Newcastle. So it's absolutely not the same as being with you, not the same as, you know, the train grinding over the bridge and looking down on the Tyne Bridge as it goes into Central Station. But at least in some sense, I feel it's nice to be back, and thank you very much for your welcome. To business, I'm focusing particularly on changes which came into play from the 1st of January. The core of what I'm going to talk about was a presentation I initially did for British Marine and then for Maritime UK December, before the changes came into play. Gary Hindmarsh, Secretary to this branch, saw it and saw an opportunity to ask me to explain more. So I'm particularly focusing on that change in the 1st of January, the end of the transition period. There's other things that are happening, obviously, with professional qualifications, other changes that are in play anyway, other work that's being done, for example, by the engineering professions to get wider recognition between countries and between professions. But I'm focusing particularly on that change in the 1st of January. Therefore, also, I'll say a brief word about the Turing scheme, which is another change the government brought in as a direct result of that flip over point between December and January. And because Gary knows, and you heard from Dennis, I've been appointed a commissioner with the Maritime Skills Commission. I'll say something about the Maritime Skills Commission, what it's doing, how it fits in, and what we've been doing so far since we got going in July last year. For professional qualifications, I see 3 different types, and I'll talk about them separately. Regulated professions, obviously like those that are members of the 3 organisations that are supporting this branch. Seafarers are different, those who are covered by STCW, different rules, different procedures. And there's also non-regulator professions, the likes of RIA certificates, and the different rules apply to each of them, different sorts of changes applying to each of them. So I'll take them in turn. For the regulated professions, the core of the story is that not much is changing straight away for most people. For the great majority of people, things are carrying on. If you're already doing some work in Germany, doing some work in Greece, you're probably fine, and it will carry on like that for some time. Quite a lot of existing approvals will carry over. So just as it is for us in personal terms, with our European health cards, until they run out, we can still use them. So it is with professional qualifications. I'm not going to talk about other professions with some special law rules applying, like lawyers and auditors. I mean, they're quite different, and that will apply to some people in some of the organisations that you work with. And as I said, for those who are STCW, I'll talk about them separately. The EU word for it rather appealingly is sailors. It's the word we all used when we were 4, and we've chosen a different language since, but sailor will do, and I'll talk about that group separately as a second phase. But the core of it is that if you've already got a recognition, you're fine. If not, you need to apply in each country where you intend to work. There's no blanket approval. Now, much of that was true anyway, even when we were a member of the EU. Now, the words you see here saying that you'll need to do this even if you're only providing short-term or occasional professional services, these are government words. Both sides of the channel, both the EU and the UK government, are saying this is the formal position, that if you want to work in Spain, it's a regulated profession, you need to knock on the door with the relevant professional body in Spain and say, hello, I want to work in Spain, and so on. In practice, you will all know, and it will be true of every profession, that doesn't always apply, and that quite a lot can be done and is done without formal registration. Exactly how that applies, individual, profession by profession, country by country, client by client, that's going to vary. But I remember in my own consultancy, Dennis explained that I've run my own consultant, actually alongside the MSA as well, but done it for a long time. I remember winning a project with a government department here in the UK. And shortly after I'd won it, they came back to me and said, "Ooh, we've just discovered you're not on our database. We can only contract with people who are on the database, on our approved list. Can you fill in this form, please? And we'll get it sorted." Now, clearly they were in a position where they wanted to work with me, so they weren't treating that as a barrier. If they'd wanted to treat it as a barrier and not want to work with me, they'd have used it. Of course they would. So exactly how it applies in your set of circumstances may well vary, but this is the formal position. And there's a really good website to help you work out what the position is. Rather poetically, they call it the Reg Prof database, Registered Professions database. And it's a nice, simple, it's a model in many ways. You can see in the middle 3 boxes. Where did you get your qualification? UK. Where do you want to practice? In this case, I've chosen Malta. Why not? Look outside. Let's go to Malta. And the profession you wish to practice. I've chosen naval architect anyway, Dennis, but naval architect just to use it to illustrate the point. When you hit submit, it's the box down in the bottom corner says, aha, so you remember Arena, good for you. And in the bottom right-hand corner, it says, in this host country, in this particular case, they're saying this profession's not regulated in Malta. You're fine, you can book your flight, off you go. With a bit of hunting around, I found that wasn't the case in Spain. But in Spain, you get the same message, hello, you're a member of RENA, but on the bottom right, it says, you really need to talk to the INO in Spain. Register with them, it gives you a hyperlink. The INO's website is in Spanish, not surprisingly, there's no English translation, but if you're going to be working in Spain, either you can speak Spanish or you've teamed up with someone who can. And all the information that you need is in that website. So that's very good. Nice and simple. But when I created these slides for the British Marine presentation in December, and on the 1st of January, it changed, and they put on this message, the bit in red, which I've blown up and put in the box in green so you can read it more easily. It's a warning message saying the UK stuff is no longer updated. The UK is not a member of the EU anymore. We're not updating it. So all the UK information inside this database is frozen as of the 31st of December. That looks like it's a no entry sign. It looks like it's a warning to say, sorry, this really doesn't suit anymore. But actually, when you think about it, that's not the case. It really isn't the case. And I corresponded with the people who run the website just to be sure. I've got no inside information. I just clicked on the contact us and got a response within a couple of hours. And on the next slide, this is the question that I posed to them. It's worth putting in, worth spelling it all out, because I think it's easy for people to be put off by that message sign on the message on the RegProf database, but there's no reason to be. I've said, let's assume I'm a naval architect qualified in the UK, I want to work in Spain, and so on. What the database won't do now, because it's not picking up any changes, it won't pick up any changes that RENA puts in, or any of the other regulated professions. RENA changes its approach or ceases to exist. Well, neither of those things are going to happen, are they? So I think the disadvantage to UK users is very small. Professions change their approaches very slowly. So the chance that RENA will cease existing or cease to award certification is effectively nil. And therefore, I think so long as perhaps some message on each individual institute's website explaining what the position is, but if we've got a dose of common sense and apply that, I think we're fine. And just to put that as a counter example, the MCA announced today that they're going to start some work looking at marine autonomous vessels. And they're setting up an outfit called, Mass People, MASS, Marine Automated Surface Ships, looking at the skills requirements and the standards that need to be applied. If that was to turn out, it doesn't seem likely, I know, but if that was to turn into a new regulated profession, and this new Mass People Institute was to be able to regulate profession in the UK, and you were looking to work overseas once you've got your UK-based qualifications, and we're talking some years into the future, the database obviously isn't going to pick that up. And you all know in listening to me that it's very much more likely that marine automated systems and the rest of it will get wrapped up within IMarEST or some other existing body. So I think in practice, this RegProf database will continue to be very useful indeed for the vast majority of people in the vast majority of sets of circumstances. And that's good news. For seafarers, this message is on the MCA's website. It's saying, same core message, that if you've got a certificate at the moment, you're fine. It's only really when things change for your employment or for the nature of your certificate that something changes. And the government's working to ensure that things are sorted out with the EU 27 for the long term. I put this message on our board papers, MSA board papers in December, and it was Gary Hindmarsh, your secretary, who pointed out that that message has been on the MCA website since 2018, as indeed it has. They've updated it now in the sense that they've changed the date at the foot to reassure people that this is still valid as of the 1st of January, but it's exactly the same message. We, in Maritime UK, I'm secretary to the Maritime UK People and Skills Forum. We talked about this in our meeting on the 6th of January. Ajit Jacob, Chief Examiner from the MCA, was present. Ajit explained what's actually going on. The bit at the bottom the government is working to ensure. What's happening is that each of the EU 27 members and the other members of the EEA, so Norway and Iceland, I'm sure we're not too bothered about Liechtenstein, but Norway and Iceland, are saying to EMSA, European Marine Safety Agency, each in turn, yes, we're fine. We're going to carry on working with the UK as is, don't worry. Some countries are treating that as a matter of simple routine and getting on with it, and they're efficient and they've logged their bids formally. Some have said it informally. Some are working a bit more slowly. Some are doubtless checking with the politicians that it's okay to do that and there's no wider Brexit issues they need to worry about. So at this stage, the MCA is not ready to say, here's the list and it's all sorted, but they are very confident that it will be. So it's looking like that in terms of certification, seafarers are okay. That's not the same as sorting out some of the visa issues. I think particularly with organisations, companies that are doing short trips, like the workboat companies. But in terms of certification, the MCA is pretty confident that that will be fine. The third group, non-regulator professions. The RegProf database only covers the regulated ones, and there's no structure for non-regulated ones. It's just done on a country-by-country basis. It's clear from talking to RYA, Richard Falk, head of training for the RYA, is a member of the MSA board. Richard, at the People and Skills Forum meeting in January, was saying quite a lot of stories from Spain of centres declining to recognise, refusing, don't know what the mood was, but not recognising RYA certificates after the turn in the year, particularly for commercial use on smaller vessels. And clearly RYA's picked that up, working with UK governments to try and get that sorted out. Not clear yet whether that's just teething troubles, whether it's some local official saying the UK is no longer a member of the EU, therefore we assume that these tickets don't work anymore, or whether it's a straw in the wind for something a bit more than that. Don't know. It's really quite early to say. We're only 6-7 weeks into the new process, so we don't know yet. But that might turn into something. And I think with all of this, there's potentially some policy questions. Maritime Skills Alliance works with Maritime UK. They're working very closely with the Department for Transport to identify some of the issues that get flagged up. I've briefed Mark Simmons, who's policy director for British Ports Association and who chairs the policy group for Maritime UK. I briefed Mark on the position with essentially the headlines that I've just given you. So that Maritime UK is in a position to raise this with Department for Transport, I suppose on behalf of the sector, we're talking to others in due course. If it turns out that these aren't teething troubles, just some local jobs worth throwing their weight around, if it's more than that, and it looks like there's a structural problem for the longer term, then we need to sort it. We need the government to try and sort it. Exactly how, I don't know, but I mean, we can get into that. But it's there is a route through Maritime UK which has excellent relations with Department for Transport, and obviously each individual professional body will be doing the same in its own way. And the other thing I wanted to pick up for the change around the year, the end of the transition period, was many of you will know that the UK has been a participant, very active participant for a long time in the Erasmus programme, now the Erasmus Plus programme, arranging visits for UK folk overseas and for a lot of overseas folk, European people, I mean, not just Europe actually, others, and Turkey's a major participant in the programme, to come to the UK to learn or to work. The government chose not to be part of the Erasmus programme for the longer term and reckoned it could get better value for the country by running its own. So it set up a Turing scheme named for Alan Turing, the mathematician. And I'll put the website address down the bottom. They've now opened for first bids. So there's a decent slug of money initially to get going. It will be different from the Erasmus programme because it's only about outward going students. It's about UK people going overseas to learn or to work. And the scope is deliberately, you can hear the echoes of Brexit in it, obviously. The scope is deliberately worldwide, not just Europe. I mean, in fact, Erasmus wasn't just Europe either. And there was a lot of participation. You could go to America, you can go to Turkey, but it doesn't matter. There's going to be a change of focus. We're an international sector, hugely international. Every aspect of it is international. It seems to me there's an opportunity there. And if only because there's been some participation anyway, of course, by the maritime sector in the Erasmus programme over the years, but fairly modest. This is a new opportunity. And I think I'm encouraging people to have a look at it. I think there are opportunities there. It's a pity, real shame, that it's only supporting UK people going overseas and not an exchange. Because if you knock on the door of a university overseas, for example, it's going to be a much easier conversation if you can say, and we welcome your folk here. But other countries have similar things. I was looking the other day by chance at what Singapore does. The government in Singapore has an exactly equivalent program supporting people from Singapore to go there. So if you were to talk to Singapore Maritime Academy and said, can we do a deal on the basis that we've got a scheme, you've got a scheme, there's the basis for a conversation there. Maritime Skills Commission. This was set up through Department of Transport's Maritime 2050 strategy, one of the recommendations from it. The core of it is that the Commission's to lead the sector's work in ensuring that businesses across the whole sector have the people they need to flourish. They're my words rather than the formal ones, but that's the core of it. So it's doing something, not just doing the research, but doing something to make sure, I'll put up the objectives in the next slide, the word ensure appears rather a lot. Curious structure in a way, reporting jointly to the Maritime Minister and to Maritime UK. I'm not sure that a business school would recommend joint reporting lines like that, but there's an advantage. There's an advantage that it ties the Commission both to Maritime UK, which is the business representation side, and to the Maritime Minister and to the Department for Transport, which obviously gives us the in into government. The Maritime Minister's been interested. I was thinking earlier, the last time I had a tie on was to talk to the Minister in about October. He's interested, and he attended our meeting last month. Following it closely, the department asked us to write an annual report and a 5-yearly state of the nation. So I think I treat that as a promise to listen, which is good. And as I think I said, we started work in July last year. These are the objectives set out formally in a tasking letter from the Minister. I mean, I won't read it all out. You can get the slides circulated later. But that first bit is understanding what the skills needs are. What are the issues? I mean, I used automation as an example to illustrate a point earlier. What are the skills issues with automation? How far will that change things? And do we have the tools to do that? Do we have the people to do that? So the second objective talks about skills shortages and skills gaps. Skills shortages mean there just aren't people for love nor money anywhere. And skills gaps means there's a problem. We've got people, but they're not properly trained, not properly fully fit to do the things that we want to do. So we have the apprenticeships, the qualifications, the structures that we're looking for, the training provision, the providers that we need to do the job we're talking about. Is it clear to people about career paths and how you get from here to there? Is there effective promotion so that people know about the sector? And then really quite a different one is the last one, increasing exports of maritime education and training. I happen to be in the lead on that, and I'll say a bit more about it when we talk about the projects. So there's really quite a broad range of things there. There are 19 commissioners. The chair is Graham Baldwin, who is Vice-Chancellor at the University of Central Lancashire. Graham gets the gig because he was Vice-Chancellor at Solent University, Warsash. Previously, he'd been in Lancaster, went back down south for 5 years, Vice-Chancellor of Solent's gone back north again. Therefore, although he doesn't have a deep maritime background, he's got some awareness, quite rather good awareness and understanding, knowledge, the rest from his time at Warsash. 19 commissioners, as Dennis said, on one of them. And you have 2 representatives from the Northeast, Lucy Armstrong, who's chair of the Port of Tyne, and Nikki Sayer, an associate director from Casper Shipping, so on the chartered shipbroking side of things, the shore-based side of shipping. What have we been up to? A series of projects so far. Labour market scoping report. As it happens, I did that as a consultant before I was asked to be a commissioner. The purpose of that was to understand what's already known, what work has already been done in different parts of the sector, different parts of the country, to understand what the skills issues are, where the pinch points are, and the rest of it. The extent of that, the quality of that information varies enormously. Some sectors have honestly done nothing. Others have quite a lot. Some have quite a lot, but maybe haven't pushed the questions as hard as they might. So I was trying to lay that out in the report. So we've got a base for understanding where we are now and therefore what might need to be done. We produced the first annual report, but that's given that we're a new organisation, that's essentially a process report saying what we've been up to. First really big meaty thing has been the Seafarer Cadet Review, chaired by Brian Johnson, Chief Executive of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. And that's looking root and branch at cadets. Not looking at the detail of what they're trained in, because we don't want to get in the way of the work that the Merchant Navy Training Board does, but looking at what are we trying to achieve with the Seafarer Cadet Programme. Do we have the numbers that we need? There's this magic number of 1,200 as a target, which we've got nowhere close to, rather under 800 at the moment a year. Why 1,200? That's a figure that comes from work done by Cardiff University 25 years ago. Does it still apply? All those sorts of questions Brian and a small group of other commissioners are looking into. One of the things that we've been careful to do as a commission is to put quite a bit of information about what we're up to on our website. And I'll give you the link on the very last slide. maritimeskillscommission.uk, nice and simple. So there's quite a bit of information on the Seafarer Cadet Review project page explaining their emerging thinking, what they've found so far. Online learning, that's a project I initiated on the basis that a lot of, well, every college and university, private training provider in the country had to sort themselves out very quickly indeed, nearly a year ago, when it became not possible to train people in the traditional way in a classroom. Everything had to be put online very fast and everybody coped wonderfully. But coping isn't the same as doing it as well as we might. So the purpose of that project is to look at what's happened, what the lessons are, what lessons we can draw and ought to embed for the longer term. Where there are some outstanding lessons that haven't been resolved yet. I mean, for example, the distinction between what works really well online and what you really do need to do in a classroom. And does everybody agree on that? And has anybody else found a way around it? So for the the cadet folk, for example, they said chart work was typically an issue where much easier, much more effective to do it in a classroom than to try and do it online. Other people may have found other ways around, but you know, that's the sort of thing we're focusing on. That report's almost ready. And will be published soon, and we'll have a webinar to introduce it and to talk it through. Port of the Future was an approach from UK Major Ports Group to say, looking 10, 20, 30 years into the future, what will the Port of the Future look like? And therefore, what will the skills requirements look like and how will they be different? And what do we do about it? Promoting exports, the requirement to us from the Department for Transport was to increase exports. So we ran an event in increase exports of maritime education and training. We ran an event in December, which was very well attended, 80 odd colleges, universities, private training providers from across the country and across the sector, all aspects of maritime. And we've been working very closely with Department for International Trade. We're going to run some briefing sessions with some of their people in posts overseas to explain the sector. We're about to publish, maybe as soon as tomorrow, a first go at a directory so that people in the sector can swap notes with each other more effectively and see who else is out there, perhaps when they're bidding. Nikki, who I mentioned, based in Middlesbrough, fellow commissioner, she's doing some work on creating a new qualification for careers ashore. People like the shore-based shipping side of things. And what we've not yet agreed, but probably will get into very shortly, is a labour market survey to fill in the gaps in the labour market scoping report that I talked about. Lots and lots of gaps. I think we need to go direct to employers and say, what's the position? What sorts of jobs are you struggling with? And try and get under the into the grain of some of that, under the skin of some of that, because it's very easy for employers to say something which is actually quite superficial. And when you scrape away at it you find a completely different story, and we do need to get that to the underlying story. And I'll use an example, MCA. I heard the previous chief executive of the MCA saying they were really short of surveyors. I talked to their HR team about the possibility of using an apprenticeship as a structured way of taking somebody who's maybe got a second mate's ticket and training them for the role. And when it came to the first meeting of the apprenticeship group, it turned out that they'd sorted their problem. They'd advertised and had 300 good quality applicants. So it wasn't that there was nobody out there, it's that they needed to change their terms and conditions at least as much as terms. And suddenly people came forward and said, oh, right, in that case, yeah, I would be interested in working for the MCA. So I think part of the job of the Commission is to get under the skin of some of those things and understand the issues. There's a series of headlines there, all sorts of things that we could touch on. There's my contact details, MSA website, which is Maritime Skills. We got there before the Commission did, long before the Commission, and the Maritime Skills Commission website. Leave it at that. Dennis, I'm very happy to take questions and join the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Iain. Right, we've got quite a number of questions now. I shall start the first one on the list. This is from Javier Dominguez. What if you came from Spain and wished to work in the UK?
Well, I think the database doesn't work in that sense. It's not because it's frozen, but I think the opposite logic applies. What I'm calling common sense, that says the requirements from RENA don't work. I think if you put, I haven't tried it that way, but I'm putting in the information in the database, but I think, Javier, it will work. You say you've registered with INO in Spain, you come from Spain, you want to work in the UK. It will say, aha, you're a member of INO, good for you. RENA's the people you need to talk to. I think that bit won't change, because that's already frozen in the system. If it stopped being RENA, you've got a problem, but it won't stop being RENA, will it? So I think, no, you're shaking your head, Dennis. No, it won't stop. So I was saying professions change slowly. In this sense, it's a compliment and it's a good thing. Professional bodies do move slowly because you're wanting things to be right and you don't rush on from one thing to the next. So I think it will carry on working as effectively for a good long period of time.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Hanif Kamar. As a young professional from Malaysia who wants to further maritime education in the UK, which programme, e.g. touring, Erasmus, should I focus on?
Well, Erasmus won't work now. Erasmus is essentially for EU citizens. So a lot of EU citizens have loved coming to the UK. It's the top destination. People want to come to the UK for all sorts of different reasons, but not least because we speak English pretty well. And so they can improve their personal and professional circumstances and learn English in the course of doing so. So if you're to do a naval architecture course in Newcastle, you would pick up English, improve and polish your English and get a good qualification from a recognised university and so on. From Malaysia, I don't know what the Malaysian government does. At the moment, the Turing scheme is set up to be outward only. So if people in Newcastle wanted to go to Malaysia, then it's set up to do that. Other way around, I don't know. I and others, as you heard me say, will be very keen for it to be a mutual thing, but at the moment it's not set up like that. Lots of people honestly are a bit grumpy that we're not part of Erasmus anymore and trying to get back into it. But I think the politics of that are very difficult. I would be surprised. So I'm afraid I don't know what the position is in Malaysia, and you'd need to look to see what the Malaysian government does. Unless you could find some charitable body or other professional body in the UK that's willing to sponsor it, and other members of the different professional bodies on the call may be in a better position to answer that.
Hannah's actually come back with a follow-up comment saying Malaysia might not have a similar scheme like Singapore. Singapore offers, so probably we do not have a common basis, I think is what you just said.
Well, I fear that's going to be true in a lot of countries, and it's a great shame. I think we all benefit if we listen and learn and swap with each other. But there you go. Not yet.
A number of questions here from anonymous questioners. The first one: before Brexit, did the UK need EU agreement to gain recognition with countries outside the EU, or were they allowed to make their own recognition agreements?
I mean, if take America as an example, I think if you wanted to work in America, you didn't need EU approval. You've got to sort it out with the American equivalent of IMarEST, RENA, Nautical Institute, and so on. But in any event, that's all history. If you want to work in America now, you've got to work it out directly with the American authorities.
Okay. Next anonymous question is: are visa and recognition requirements aligned? Can you only apply for a visa when you have a recognised qualification?
If only. No, I'm afraid not. These are different government departments, and in the case of many of the professional bodies, it's BEIS, the business department, standing behind. But and visa requirements are all done through the Home Office. No, they're not aligned. I'm afraid there's two sets. Yes, I will use the word bureaucracy. Two sets of bureaucracy you need to work through, and there's no shortcuts.
Okay. Next anonymous question: will removal of UK CECs equivalent provide greater employment opportunity for UK COC holders? Will the MCA issue fewer CECs to EU nationals?
I don't think the MCA is intending to remove CECs. They're renaming them, and I can't remember what they're calling them. Someone else will know. There's a new name apart from CEC, but the process will continue. There'll be something like CECs. Clearly, it's a point that Nautilus International makes very forcefully, very frequently, that the UK issues a lot of CECs. Question: does that disadvantage UK-based seafarers? But at the moment, although the MCA, as I understand it, is reviewing it, I think we don't know where that will end up. And I think it's not at all clear that there will be a major change. Somebody else may know better, but I'm not sure. And it's a different process. That's not directly related to the UK leaving the EU. There are some links, obviously, but it's not directly related. It's not a consequence.
Okay. Another anonymous question: if I was an employer wanting to expand in the maritime sector, say on automated vessels, how will the MSc be able to assist me in securing the skills I need?
Well, at the that's a good question. At the moment, the Maritime Skills Commission isn't doing anything about autonomous vessels, but we've got it on our list of things to look at. And I think it very likely that soon, perhaps through the survey, perhaps directly, we will be saying to companies that are employing people, can you find the folk that you need? Do you think you'll be able to find the folk to do the techie stuff that you haven't yet invented that will be 3 years down the road? And those questions are quite difficult to answer. And it's probably not the sort of thing in many cases where you can do it with a questionnaire. I think you probably need to sit down and talk to people, survey focus groups and so on. But we haven't done it yet, but I think it will be happening pretty soon. Because I mean, there are clearly lots of companies that are getting into it, and talking to some of the people that I've met who are working in that field now, they've found people who've got some previous skills, and then they're training them in the other bit. Through IMarEST, I attended when Kevin Daffy did a lecture on autonomous vessels 3 years ago, was it? Before he became president. He was using a nice video that Rolls-Royce has of somebody sat with a bank of screens, and he was ordering this, that, and the other to happen. And my question to Kevin was, what skills does that person need? Is he a former chief engineer that you've taught some tech to? Or is he a tech nut that you've taught some marine stuff to? Good question, Ian. We haven't got to that yet. And I think that's exactly the conversation that we need to have. So we need a collection of people around, the right collection of people around the table to get into it.
Okay. Another anonymous question. Is there specific information on the impacts to MCA commercially endorsed RYA qualifications, e.g. MCA commercially endorsed RYA Yachtmaster?
No hard facts yet. The information I was passing on from Richard Falk in the RYA was him getting a stream of emails from people, and it's at that level. People saying, hello, I've got a problem, can you help? And that's important, and we need to identify those things and flag them. It's not yet turned into anything that says, on a regular basis, we know this is happening in these provinces in Spain, it's not happening in other provinces, therefore there's something happening. We've got hard numbers on it, and so we haven't got to that. But if people have got further information and haven't yet logged it with somebody like Richard, that would be good. It would be really important to do that, because we need to understand the nature of the problem. And as I said, understand whether it's teething troubles or symptomatic of some longer term problem.
Okay. No more questions popped up just yet, so I've got one for you. What impact will there be on UK personnel or people who wish to retain European engineer registration?
Well, as far as I know, and Gary Highmarsh copied me into some internal correspondence, as far as I know, Ewing status isn't affected. Somebody else will be in a better position to comment on that, one of the IMarEST members, but I think some of those things carry on exactly as they previously did, because it's I think because it's a matter of discussion and agreement by kind of engineering council, the professional bodies, and equivalents on the continent. And therefore it's a discussion sort of professional body to professional body rather than requiring government endorsement. I think that's right, but some of the IMarEST members may be able to comment and put me right and be more precise about that.
Okay. Another follow-up from Hanif Kumar. Several universities are cancelling their courses, e.g. master's degrees, for revision due to COVID. How does this affect maritime education? And another follow-up from them, for example, Imperial College London is revising their master's degree in oil and gas, I believe.
Well, I can see why classroom revision will be cancelled, but there's lots of scope for people to do online revision, you know, Zoom and Teams and all the rest of it, and every education institution probably in the world has learned a lot fast about how best to manage that. And it's interesting, in the online learning report that we've done, we put it out to tender, and the tender was won by Solent University. So they've been drawing in part on their experience, where people started off in the first phase saying, this isn't as good as a classroom, and they weren't doing the social stuff. I know you're going to talk about social opportunity at the end of this. They weren't using the interaction. People weren't learning from each other. They hadn't perfected a way of people finding out more and interacting more effectively with lecturers and tutors. It felt kind of top down, one way, bilateral stuff, rather than broadening it out. And a lot of learning is obviously very different from that. I remember when I asked my son, when he did his degree, his degrees in computer science, I asked him how much he learned from lectures and the rest. Next to nothing. He got most of it online, and he got most of it online from others. It's in the nature of his degree. How did you work out what was reliable and what wasn't? Well, that was a key part of his learning. So I would have thought with the revision classes, it would be very well within the capability of every university to manage quite a lot of interaction, and would encourage any university that's stumbling with that to talk to some others, because I think, cracked it is probably going too far, but a lot of people have made a lot of progress with that.
I was interested in your email that you had sent with reference INO in Spain. What was their answer to the question?
They're bureaucrats. They didn't quite come back and answer every last bit of what I asked, but they were essentially saying, yes, that's right. That my understanding is correct. They are, from their point of view, they put that warning notice up, and I suppose alert rather than warning notice, because remember, the EU's a rules-based organisation. They're saying, as of the 1st of January, we have no legal authority for updating this database. Even if you send us stuff, we can't do anything with it. Therefore, we are saying, because we're nice, friendly people, as of the 31st of December, that's it. This is just frozen until such time as there's any change. And that's quite helpful. They're not going to block access. I mean, it's an open website. You can see it from anywhere. You don't need to be in your colleague from Malaysia can see it. No problem at all. But it's not going, the UK bit isn't going to change. So perfectly happy, perfectly friendly. The bit they didn't answer was my follow-up question saying, is the opportunity for the UK to continue to be part of this database, is that being talked about? Is it on the agenda? Is the UK government asking? And they didn't answer that, and I don't know. I've not heard anything to that effect, but it may be. And clearly it makes a bit of sense to get cracking now if we're going to do it. Because if it's frozen and then there's a gap, you may have missed something.
Okay. Two anonymous statements, I think, but partially in response to the earlier questions. First one was most UK universities are doing online learning only until the summer of this year.
Yeah.
UK maritime colleges remain open as they train essential workers, which is clearly the case, and the year-end qualification is not affected by Brexit. Fiani has members outside of the EU.
Good. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Turkey. Good.
Yeah. And I think when you're saying maritime universities, you're probably talking about cadets there.
Right.
Probably that's what that means. I think there's a difference between a cadet program and maybe naval architecture, some marine engine stuff, marine engineering stuff. What my wife's nephew's doing in Newcastle. I mean, he's not being invited in. I think he's doing quite a lot online. The balance is obviously going to vary, and I think more and more people will be probably testing the boundaries there. Because I'm a fan of doing stuff online. I think it's worked. I think meetings have worked. I can accept your invitation to come. If it had meant a trip up to Newcastle or South Shields, that would have been wonderful, but it would have taken a lot more time.
Yes.
So I can do stuff online, which I can't otherwise do because of the time factor. And what we were trying to get at with the online learning report was where those boundaries are. What stuff really does need to be done in person. I would have thought boat handling will be part of it. Actually getting in a boat, in your face, understanding that all these rules you've learned have got a practical application. You've just got to get it right. That's quite different from anything you can do online, I think. But other people will have better idea for different bits of their professional range.
Okay. Right, we seem to have finally exhausted the questions, so I'd very much like to thank you for that presentation, Iain. It was clearly very interesting tell by the number of questions and indeed the speed with which they arrived. Typically, I'm sitting looking at a blank laptop screen until about 25 past 6. Sorry, 25 past 5. The first question popped up about 4 or 5 minutes after you started speaking, and they continued fairly systematically through. So I think that was a very well received talk. So thank you once again. It was very good. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us and watching. I'll tell you a little more about our next meeting in just a moment. But when I finish, please don't go away, because Anastasia wishes to update you on some issues related to post-event networking. So our next presentation is in 2 weeks on the 4th of March, when Mr. Ian Ridley of Sunderland University and Mr. Keith Hutchinson of the Safina Group will be discussing the role of project management during concept design. So that is all from me. Thank you very much. And now over to Anastasia.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Ian. Let's just share my screen. Okay, thank you all so much for watching the webinar today. We would now like to invite all the attendees to join a post-webinar networking session. To join, you can go to www.imarest.org/meet now, and then enter the password webinar. And then you can continue the conversations there. That concludes today's session. Thank you again to our speaker, Ian. Thank you to our host, Dennis. Thank you all to those who watched, and good night.